Iraqi news reports again. March 27th, U.S.-led strikes kill and wound 80 ISIS militants in Tikrit. Salahuddin. On Thursday, a security source in Salahuddin province said that 80 ISIS militants have been either killed or injured in airstrikes in Tikrit. The source stated for Iraqi news, warplanes of the international coalition have carried out airstrikes against headquarters and gathering sites for the ISIS group militants in the areas of Wadi Sheshin, located in southern Tikrit, and Al-Qadisa, located in northern Tikrit, and the presidential palaces in the center of the city. The airstrikes resulted in killing 50 ISIS militants and injuring around 30 others, the source added. Now, if you don't know, the last couple weeks, the Shiite militia from Iran have been helping the Iraqi troops fight ISIS, and so the U.S. coalition stepped out because they don't want to work with Iran and don't trust them, and neither does Iran trust the U.S. coalition. So now, recently, the Iran Shiite militia decided to pull out because they don't trust U.S. again. So now U.S. is back in there and seems to have a pretty successful bombing raid today. So I'm going to give you the news clip from ABC News about it. They don't discuss the numbers though. But they do talk about the plan and what's going to be happening and the big take of taking back Mosul in the future. God bless you.
Precision airstrikes in Iraq led by U.S. warplanes. Coalition forces are on the offensive today, trying to retake a town about 80 miles north of Baghdad, overrun by ISIS. Hello, I'm Ty Hernandez in New York. Officials say as many as 20 targets were hit. Let's bring in ABC's Louis Martinez from the Pentagon, who has more. Louis, the ground offensive into Tikrit, which is the area we're talking about, has been going on for some time. So why U.S. airstrikes now?
Basically, it comes to a request from the Iraqi government. They had not asked for U.S. airstrikes as part of this operation. In fact, this was an operation that was being led by the Iranians. The Iranians have advisors inside Iraq, and they are supporting the Iraqi government in its fight against ISIS. The United States has no cooperation with the Iranians, but the Iranians are also backing large numbers of Shiite militias that were part of this offensive. So the United States was not asked to participate until this week, when, after 2 weeks now, the Iraqi forces that had encircled Tikrit were basically stalled. They were being held off by a much smaller force of ISIS fighters, and now I think the Iraqi government came to the realization that they did need the United States to come in there with their precision airstrikes, because it would have been a tough urban fight inside the city, and now they've requested those airstrikes, and the United States has complied, and dropping, as you said, a significant number of airstrikes over the last 24 hours.
It is a double-edged sword, though, for those Iraqi forces, because they had been joined, as you said, by Iranian-led Shiite forces. Now a significant number of those Iranian-led forces say they are leaving. So why do they say they're leaving, and how serious is this for the Iraqis to lose those forces on the ground?
So the Iranian-backed militias say they're pulling out of this offensive right now, with the ground offensive into Tikrit, because they say they don't trust the United States. They say they don't trust the American aircraft that are going to be participating in these airstrikes, saying that in the past they've been targeted, so they say by mistake, by the United States aircraft. There's no way to prove that, of course, but that's the narrative that they're doing. Now, we are hearing a different version from the United States, and that came from the senior U.S. commander at U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, who told a congressional committee today that the United States had made a precondition to the Iraqi government that we will do these airstrikes if the Shia militias are pulled back. And that's what happened today. The Shia militias pulled back. Now, the United States saying that it was because they demanded this of the Iraqi government. They wanted the Iraqi government to be exerting control over this large force. We're talking about 23,000 personnel that were attacking Tikrit and 18,000 of them were from these Shia militias. According to General Austin, those militias have now pulled back, and the taking of Tikrit is going to be taken care of by about 4,000 Iraqi security forces, mainly special operations personnel and police, and then they're going to be backed by the U.S. airstrikes. So two different narratives, but the net result is the same, that the Shia militias have pulled back.
But with that loss of ground troops, is that enough? I mean, do the Iraqis have enough on the ground in order to take Tikrit when they weren't making much headway in the first place?
You know, Ty, it's been very surprising the number of Iraqi forces that have been involved here. The competency of these forces came into question given that most of these were Shia militia volunteers. Yes, they were Iranian backed. Yes, they were Iranian armed. Yes, they were Iranian planned for this mission. But at the same time, they were not making headway against what is considered to be a very small number of ISIS fighters inside Tikrit. General Dempsey saying that he characterizes the numbers as being hundreds. So he was saying it's inevitable that these forces, the Iraqi forces, could take over Tikrit in short order, but that proved not to be the case. If anything, the ISIS fighters inside Tikrit held off very well. They held this larger force at bay. Now, by pulling them back, you move in more highly trained forces. These are counterterrorism forces, the special operations personnel that were trained by the United States. They're some of the most highly trained forces inside Iraq. They're the ones that are going to be pushing into Tikrit. So it's going to be less about numbers and more about quality, and the fact that they're going to be able to work together with these American aircraft that are going to be dropping the bombs inside Tikrit.
The battle for Tikrit is significant, but there's a much larger battle for Mosul ahead. So what does this tell us about how we've handled it so far and the challenges to come?
That's right, Ty. The battle for Mosul, whenever it happens later this year, is seen as the crown jewel in the taking back ISIS, the northern Iraq from ISIS. This is Iraq's second largest city. Very easily, ISIS was able to take control of it last summer. So this offensive into Tikrit, which is a much smaller city, being held but defended by a much smaller number of ISIS fighters, and yet with an overwhelming size of this Iraqi force being held at bay, it just didn't bode well for any of the ground planning that the Iraqis were going to conduct for Mosul. If anything, this is seen as a dry run. I think now what you're going to see is this narrative that the Iraqis need to rely on the United States, that they should turn away from the Iranians who planned this Tikrit offensive. It obviously did not go well. General Austin telling Congress this morning that they did not have an adequate plan to go inside of Tikrit, that they had very little coordination. It was just very low level of planning. And if anything that we're seeing over the last couple of hours, the last 24 hours from the United States side, all these statements have been making the point about how effective American airstrikes are and how effective the American level of planning is. So it's not just airstrikes that are taking place in Tikrit, but it's also that the American military planners are now coordinating the offensive there with Iraqi forces.
Well, we have a long way to go and a lot more developments ahead. ABC's Louis Martinez, thank you so much for joining us. And you can keep up with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring this story for exclusive